More than 100,000 people have gathered at a far-right rally in London, organised by anti-Islam activist Tommy Robinson.
There is a question hanging over Westminster tonight, and it is not going away. Did the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom choose to glide past his own people behind tinted glass at the very moment his Labour government puts in place rules that many say will open the door to thousands more people who arrived here illegally? Stay with me, because over the next few minutes we're walking through all of it. The crowd, the convoy and the paperwork at the heart of this storm. What's been avoided and what are hundreds of thousands of voices shouting in the cold. Because once you see how these pieces fit together, you'll understand why the anger outside Westminster feels less like a protest and more like a warning. The crowd and the convoy. Picture central London on a cold day. Roads around Parliament and Downing Street are packed with men and women carrying handwritten placards about borders, bills, schools, hospitals and basic fairness. They are not professional activists with printed banners and polished talking points. They are delivery drivers who came on their day off, nurses in worn winter coats, shopkeepers who shut early and risk a day's takings, pensioners leaning on sticks, and young parents holding children's hands in one fist and cardboard signs in the other. They talk about hotel bills and housing lists, about their towns changing faster than anyone prepared them for, about being called names online when they even raise the subject of illegal migration, as if asking questions about who comes into your own country is now something shameful. Above them, cameras pick up the familiar formation of heavy vehicles and police motorcycles. The Prime Minister's convoy moves out from the secure zone. Windows dark, lights steady, gliding past the human traffic. Officially, there is nothing dramatic in that movement. Convoys move when security teams say they must move. Routes are cleared. Schedules do not stop because of noise outside the barriers. That is what the briefing notes will say. And on one level, it is entirely true. But for the people in that crowd, the message they took from that 30 seconds of video was very different. To them, it looked like the country they pay for, the country they grew up in, the country whose laws they obey, passing them by without even a nod. Some will say that is an unfair reading, that politicians cannot be expected to break protocol every time there is a protest. Yet politics does not live in technicalities. It lives in impressions. It lives in whether people feel seen or feel brushed aside. And when the thing you are protesting about is illegal migration, and the man inside that convoy is the one who promised to get a grip on it, the sight of him rolling away behind reinforced glass lands very heavily. Keep that image in your mind, because the next step is to ask what exactly his government has been doing while those voices outside grow louder.
The protest started in the streets south of the River Thames before heading towards Westminster. Organisers dubbed the Unite.
What changed under the Labour government? When Labour came into office, they promised a reset, smash the gangs, clear the backlog, restore order to the border. Those were the phrases that made the headlines and reassured people who were already at the end of their patience. In speech after speech, ministers insisted that the days of chaos were over and that under their watch the United Kingdom would have both compassion and control. In the detail, though, were choices that now sit at the centre of this storm. The new asylum framework combines stricter words with more generous safety nets. Temporary statuses that can stretch on for years are presented as pragmatic solutions. Wider use of humanitarian exceptions is defended as the mark of a civilised country. New guidance on when someone who arrived illegally may still be granted permission to stay because removal is considered too difficult, too expensive or too risky sits quietly in long documents that almost nobody outside the system ever reads. Supporters of the government say this is grown-up policy making. They argue that you can be tough on criminal gangs while still recognising genuine need, and that in a complicated world you will always need flexible tools to protect some people, even if their journey did not begin with a neatly stamped visa. Critics look at exactly the same rules and see something else. They see a system that says, in practice, if not in slogans, that once you are here, you are very likely to stay. They see a structure that tells anyone watching from afar that the real barrier is not the law, but the journey itself. If you can pay the smugglers, survive the crossing, and memorise the right phrases, the odds silently tilt in your favour. They see a set of incentives that rewards those who take illegal routes over those who quietly wait in a queue that never seems to move. And of course, if that reading is even partly true, then the question becomes obvious. Who has been paying attention to those odds and how are they using them? The new playbook. Anyone who still believes that criminal networks are clumsy or disorganised has not been paying attention. Every time a government publishes guidance, someone somewhere reads it not as a deterrent, but as a manual. In private chats and encrypted channels, step-by-step instructions are shared on what to say, what not to say, which nationality to claim, which particular group to identify with, which keywords to drop into an interview, and which details to quietly blur. We have already seen reports of detailed documents being circulated in Arabic, teaching people how to present themselves as part of a specific stateless community in order to fit neatly into the protection categories our own Home Office has drawn up. The same basic principle can apply under any new labour rules that widen certain categories, soften proof requirements in practice, or create new forms of semi-permanent leave to remain. You do not need an elaborate conspiracy theory to understand how that works. If the message from official paperwork is that certain stories are very hard to challenge and lead to very high grant rates, then those stories will be copied, rehearsed and sold. People who are genuinely in danger and people who are simply looking for a better economic life end up reading from the same script because the script is what opens the door. Once that script has been used and someone is embedded in the system with a claim that cannot easily be disproved, the British state finds itself stuck. Even if doubts are raised later, deportation becomes a long, grinding, expensive process that often ends in stalemate because no country will accept the person back, or because proving their real identity beyond doubt is practically impossible. Officials know this, lawyers know this, the gangs certainly know this, and so long as that remains true, every announcement about tougher rhetoric will be quietly undercut by the reality that the system still offers a high reward to anyone who can reach it. You can probably feel where this is going, because when that pattern repeats at scale, the argument shifts from individual hardship to national capacity, from rare exceptions to a normal way of doing business. Let's pause for a second, because this is where the story stops being abstract and starts touching real lives. Hotel bills, housing lists, school places, GP queues. We've just heard how the new framework and humanitarian carve-outs work on paper, but out on the ground, people see something very different. So tell me honestly in the comments, when you look at your town, do you think the system is close to breaking, or do you think people are exaggerating? Your experience matters more than spin. If you want this side of the debate to be visible, the side that doesn't come with a party logo, hit like so it isn't buried by the algorithm. And subscribe if you want to keep following these stories with proper context, not just who shouted what, but how the rules, numbers and decisions actually land where you live.
Please do this, are ya? Traitors, mate, a lot of ya. This is our country. You're standing with us.
The numbers behind the mood. Let us talk about scale without hiding behind jargon. Over recent years, asylum applications in the United Kingdom have risen to levels not seen before in modern records. Tens of thousands of people arrive each year through irregular routes, including dangerous small boat crossings, adding to tens of thousands more who entered on visas and then switched into the asylum system once they were already here. At the same time, the backlog of undecided cases has remained stubbornly high, even after well-publicised pushes to clear older files with short, bulk decisions that sometimes raise as many questions as they answer.
This figures published today is putting increasing pressure on the government, which promised to smash the gangs organising the dangerous journey. Simon Jones.
Every person in that backlog needs housing, healthcare, legal advice and financial support while their case grinds through the system. That means billions of pounds in hotel contracts, rental deals and support payments, all ultimately drawn from the taxes of people who are themselves struggling with food bills, energy bills and mortgages. Under the Labour government, ministers talk about new fast-track processes and tougher standards, yet the number of people being granted some form of leave to remain each year remains in the tens of thousands. Grant rates jump around depending on the country and the category, but overall, roughly 1 in every 2 applicants at least receives protection at the first decision, and many of those who are refused remain in the country for years through appeals, fresh claims or simple lack of removal capacity. For someone watching from a small town where a local hotel has suddenly filled with new arrivals, or from a city where housing lists stretch further each month, those abstract statistics feel very concrete. They look at their own lives, then at those numbers, then at a Prime Minister driving past them, and they ask themselves a simple question. Is this really about what we can no longer control, or is it about what those in charge choose not to control? And when they hear yet another promise that the system will be fixed, without seeing any visible reduction in the numbers on the ground, their scepticism hardens into something closer to anger. They begin to suspect that the constant talk of complexity and constraints is less an explanation and more an excuse. When the same pattern repeats year after year, when surges are explained away and targets are quietly missed, people draw their own conclusions. They stop believing that the state is simply overwhelmed and start wondering whether the state has quietly chosen to live with a level of illegal migration that most voters never signed up for. That is the mood you could feel in that crowd of 200,000, even if every individual had their own story to tell. Warnings and shrugs. One of the most troubling threads running through all of this is the sense that warnings have been issued, filed, and then quietly ignored. Foreign governments have raised concerns about people using their territory as a stepping stone, turning up with documents that do not quite match the stories they tell to British officials. Inspectors have pointed out anomalies in asylum statistics from certain countries, such as sudden spikes in claims under very specific categories without any matching crisis on the ground back home. Court rulings have highlighted cases where individuals were found to have given false accounts, used forged paperwork or changed their identity mid-process, yet still remained in the United Kingdom because no safe and accepted destination could be identified for removal. Each of those episodes, taken alone, might be dismissed as an unfortunate one-off or as the inevitable price of dealing with difficult, messy realities. Taken together over a decade and more, they draw a different picture. They suggest that people inside the system have known for a very long time that certain loopholes are being exploited hard and often. Now, with Labour in power and promising a new era of seriousness, you might expect those loopholes to be at the very top of the to-do list. Yet when the latest announcements arrive, the language is familiar, the tough talk is loud, but the detailed changes somehow leave the most sensitive routes largely intact or even quietly widened under more generous descriptions of who qualifies for protection. Is that simple incompetence? Is it bureaucratic inertia? The civil service doing what it has always done because changing course would be painful and slow? Or is there something more deliberate in letting certain channels remain open while insisting in public that the age of open doors is over? I cannot tell you the answer for certain. But I can tell you that more and more people have started asking the question out loud, and that is not something any government can ignore forever. Voices from the street, and
they walk around in gangs. You're not safe because you're usually on your own, but they're always in groups of at least 5.
Listen carefully to what some of those people say when a camera is not in their face and they are not trying to perform for social media. A woman from a northern town talks about her son who cannot get a council flat after leaving the armed forces, while the local hotel is fully booked with recent arrivals whose claims have not yet been decided. She says she is not against genuine refugees. She is against a system that appears to bend over backwards for those who break the rules, while stepping over those who kept them. In her words, the message from the state seems to be that if you risk your life for this country, you queue. But if you risk your life coming to this country illegally, you are fast-tracked into a warm bed. A man from the south coast says his small business is on the edge, his energy bills are savage, and yet he is told that there is no spare money for tax cuts or infrastructure in his area because the state is tied up funding national obligations. He looks at the amount being spent on asylum accommodation and support and simply shakes his head. A care worker from the Midlands describes the pressure on local services, the difficulty getting general practitioner appointments, the school places that simply are not there, and wonders why every conversation about limits and prioritising her community is treated as suspect. She does not talk about race or religion. She talks about numbers, about ratios, about capacity. These are not extremists. They are not reading manifestos on the way to a rally. They are reading bank statements, council letters, and headlines about new arrivals being placed in their area with no warning and no say. When they then see a policy that seems to make it easier, not harder, for people who arrive illegally to stay long term, they understandably ask whether anyone in power actually lives in the same world they do. That is why the convoy clip hit such a nerve. It put a face and a limousine on that feeling of being brushed past. The optics battle.
You staged this bonfire! Yeah, you staged it! You staged it! Stacey Trump! You staged it!
In modern politics, perception is not a footnote. It is the front line. Often it matters more than the policies, more than the briefings, more than the carefully stapled paperwork that ministers insist will speak for itself. And nothing proves that more clearly than the moment a 30-second clip of the Prime Minister's convoy eased onto social media. In an instant, what should have been a forgettable piece of routine logistics transformed into a symbol people could project their frustration onto. Captions appeared describing him as fleeing 200,000 protesters. Commentators stitched the footage next to crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder, chanting about borders, fairness, housing, schools, opportunity, all the things that seem to be slipping further out of reach. The cold breath, the cardboard signs, the tired faces set against tinted glass and steady police outriders. The contrast told its own story. And here is the irony. In strict factual terms, nothing exceptional happened. No sirens, no rushing, no emergency manoeuvres. The convoy moved exactly as security protocols said it should. But politics does not hinge on protocols. It hinges on impressions and on what people feel they are witnessing. What they felt in that moment was distance. Distance between Labour's warm rhetoric on compassion and the cold realities felt in stressed towns and overstretched services. Distance between speeches about fairness and a housing list that hasn't moved in years. Distance between a Prime Minister shielded behind reinforced glass and families shielded only by overdrafts, food banks and waiting lists. Maybe the Prime Minister had another non-negotiable engagement. Maybe his team decided stopping would pose unnecessary risk. Maybe they didn't see that ignoring the crowd would carry a political cost of its own. But when you are already fighting the accusation that you do not hear or respect public concerns over illegal migration, deciding not to be visibly present not even for a moment, lands heavily. Because in politics, absence speaks, silence speaks, movement speaks. And a leader rolling past 200,000 citizens without acknowledgement creates an image that no press release can easily scrub away. It becomes the picture people remember when they ask themselves whether those in power are leading them or simply leaving them behind. Complicity or cowardice? So we come to the question that nobody in government wants to hear spoken clearly. If ministers know that certain categories are being abused, if inspectors have raised concerns, if foreign partners have sounded the alarm, if journalists and whistleblowers have traced the networks that coach people through the process, then why are those loopholes still open? Why do we still see guidance that can be read as an invitation to arrive illegally and then stay on humanitarian grounds? Why are the people who game the system moving faster than the people who are supposed to guard it? There are only a few broad explanations. One is simple incompetence, the idea that the machine is so slow and heavy that even when people at the top want change, it gets lost in drafts and consultations and departmental turf wars. Another is moral cowardice, the fear of being called cruel or bigoted if you close certain routes tightly and insist on hard evidence before granting protection. A third is more uncomfortable. It is the possibility that some people in politics and in the wider establishment quietly prefer high levels of migration, even illegal migration, for reasons ranging from economic theories about labour markets to long-held beliefs about multiculturalism and demographic change. They would never admit that openly because they know how it would play with the public. So instead, they talk tough, tweak numbers, and leave enough openings in the system that the overall flow never really falls. A fourth, which some people whisper rather than say outright, is a kind of fatalism, the idea that global pressures are now so strong, conflicts so many, and borders so porous that the best any government can do is manage the optics while letting the underlying reality roll on. Under that view, the priority is not to reduce the numbers in a serious way, but to keep the issue just below the level of outright revolt, to offer occasional crackdowns and headline-friendly flights, while knowing that the deeper incentives remain unchanged. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. But it would certainly explain why, decade after decade, the big promises are made, the big speeches are delivered, and yet the basic pattern stubbornly refuses to shift. By the end of tonight, the headlines will move on. But the people who went home from that protest to cramped flats, long waiting lists and rising bills don't get to scroll away from their reality. They're left wondering whether their own government sees them as anything more than a backdrop. So I want to hear from you. After everything you've heard, do you still trust this government to fix illegal migration? Or have you mentally checked out of believing any of their promises? Tell me in the comments. If this helped you think it through instead of just react tap, like so more people can do the same. And subscribe if you're tired of being told you're extreme for asking basic questions about borders, fairness and honesty. This channel will be following every twist in this story.